Hey BoLS fans, AdamHarry back again with another BoLS review. Today I'm going over Star Wars Age of Rebellion, the role-playing game. This is the core rule book. I'm going to be reviewing the contents of the book. Normally this would be an unboxing, but obviously it's not in a box. First off, let me go over some of the basic facts here. This is about a 460 roughly pages of full-color hardback book. MSRP on this is $59.95. You can probably pick it up online a little bit cheaper through some of the discount stores, or go to your favorite local gaming store and help support that community by picking it up. This does have a couple of companion apps, which is kind of neat right off the bat. There's a Star Wars Dice role-playing thing you can get from the App Store or on Android. Check it out, StarWars.com, FantasyFlightGames.com. You can also buy the special dice that go with this game as an additional purchase pack thing, which I'll go over here when I review it. It's one of the things that actually makes this game very unique and really cool. This is a role-playing game, R-O-L-E, playing versus a role, R-O-L-L, playing game. What I mean by that is, if you've got a buddy that likes to min-max with stats and numbers and stuff like that and just wants to kill stuff, blow stuff up with, rolling 20s, this is not the game that's going to really appeal to them. There is a dice pool mechanic that is very different from the D20 version of this that was published years ago. This is a completely different role-playing game from that beast. The setting is all the same. It's still Star Wars that we all know and love. This takes place during the Age of Rebellion, obviously, so during that time, probably right around the first New Hope Star Wars movie. So it's in that time frame, right around there. This is, again, not a D20 system. It's completely different. I'm going to go ahead and open her up, and I'll get to that page and go over it. So let's get started. Let me just dive right in. I want to show off a couple of other things too. First off, contents. As you can see here, a ton of stuff. There are 13 chapters. One of those is actually kind of an episodic adventure here. But you've got your core mechanics in the first chapter. Second chapter is character creation. Third chapter is all skills. Fourth is talents. 5 is gear and equipment. 6 is conflict and combat, how that all works. There's also space combat, so spaceships and vehicles, chapter 7. Chapter 8 is the Force and Force powers. You can't actually play a Force-sensitive character. Playing a Jedi is a little tricky, seeing as how when this time frame in them takes place. You can be a Jedi technically, but it's not quite the same. It also talks about the compatibility with Edges of the Empire, which is the sister/companion book. If you have Edges of Empire, this actually works seamlessly with that system. It's the same system, but it works seamlessly with that book. So if you own both books, you get kind of the full spectrum of the role-playing game and any other additions. They basically use two similar mechanics, which I'll cover here when we get to that part. Chapter 10 is the Galaxy. Talks about basically what's going on in the Star Wars galaxy as far as, like, for instance, they talk about the hyperlanes, the inner rim, expansion regions, all that fun stuff, rebel territory, all that. Chapter 11, that was 10. Chapter 11 talks about the rebellion, how it's organized and the history of it. Chapter 12 is the Adversaries. You can have, if you're a rebel, you can actually have adversaries in the Rebel Alliance. Maybe there's a commander that's kind of a dick to your party. Maybe there's a spy or something. So then you also have, obviously, the Galactic Empire and all that fun stuff. Then you've got Chapter 13, which again is that kind of pre-made adventure. So let's get started. Let me go ahead and just flip the page over. It's full art all the way through, really pretty. FFG's done an amazing job with the art in this book. It's laid out really well, really simple. It's really pretty to go through. All that fun stuff. I'm not going to flip through every page in the book, obviously. There's a lot of stuff to go through. But I do want to go over, I want to slow down a little bit and go over some of the dice stuff, because this is a very different system than what you may be used to if you're coming from, say, Pathfinder or a D&D or something like that with D20s. So this game uses a dice pool mechanic. So how it works is you take your relevant stats and gear and abilities, and it forms one dice pool, and then you add in negative dice that come from the difficulty of the challenge or situational modifiers determined by the GM. When you roll the dice, they don't actually have numbers on them, they have symbols, and the symbols can determine success or failure. They can determine whether it was advantageous or threatening. Basically, it determines not only if you passed or succeeded and by how much, it can also show you if there was any negative or positive effects. So you could actually roll a failure but have some positive effects that get kicked off based on the dice. And that's why I wanted to show this off. Again, they do have special dice you can buy, but there's also this really handy dandy conversion chart here. So if you just want to use the dice that you have, typically you're going to need some D6s, some D8s, some D12s, and then also probably just a pair of two 10-siders for 1s and 10s. So if you've played any, you probably have these lying around. But let me go over these dice real quick. First off, you have the positive dice, which you've got boost dice, ability dice, proficiency dice. They all have different symbols on them, and there's a different rates at which those symbols are on them. The negative dice are setback dice, which are counters to boost dice, difficulty dice, which are counters to the ability dice, and the challenge dice, which is counter to the proficiency dice. There's also the force die, which is a different thing for force users. It actually doesn't have any positive or negative effects. It just generates force points. Basically, it's kind of like an extra resource pool for using abilities and stuff like that. So that's a whole other thing. And again, there's light and dark points that you can accumulate, which have different effects. So basically, that's what these dice look like. But they don't make a lot of sense because they all have symbols. They don't really have any number value. And if you've never played the game, you have no idea what these symbols mean. So let me go over the symbols real quick. On the boost dice, the ability dice, and the proficiency dice, so the positive dice, on each one of those is going to be the success symbol. And let me just zoom in really quick, and you guys can see what I'm talking about here. So success, that's what that symbol is right there. That just helps determine whether or not the check actually succeeded or not, and by how much. If you have more successes than you have failures, the check passes. If you have, say you're doing say you're shooting a stormtrooper or something like that, if you have a bunch of extra successes, that actually matters, and that will affect the damage as well. So that's something there. Let me just pull up here. Advantage, that's what that symbol is right there. That indicates the positive outcome of the die roll. Again, independent of the success, you could get a positive advantage or not. So it's slightly different. And then over here is the triumph symbol. This is only on the yellow die, which again is the proficiency die. That indicates a super awesome result. It counts as it provides two effects. First, it counts as a success in every way that a success is. And secondly, triumph symbols can be used to trigger incredibly potent effects. So something really cool could happen when the triumph symbol shows up. On the flip side, we've got, let me zoom back in, failures. So there is a failure. That's the failure symbol. Again, if you roll your success and failure dice, if you've got more failures than successes, you have failed the roll. But it only takes one failure to fail the check. It doesn't cumulative. So if you roll like 4 failures and 1 success, so your net is 3 failures. It doesn't actually hurt you or make it any worse. You just fail the check. So it says right there, multiple net failure symbols do not influence the magnitude of the failure. That really only comes from threat. These are the threat symbols. Those are on all the negative dice as well. Again, it is possible for a successful die roll on whatever the thing was, but it could generate a lot of threat. So one example to give is like, say you're slicing into a computer terminal and you totally get into the terminal and you're rock and rolling, hacking or whatever, but it's actually triggered the security alarm and you've done kind of a crappy job on that. So rolled a bunch of threat. So the positive thing is you succeeded in slicing the terminal. The negative thing is now everybody knows you're there, so kind of backfired on you. And then of course we've got the dreaded despair symbol, which is that one right there. It counts as 2 things again. It counts as a failure and it can be countered by a success. Second, each despair can be used to trigger potent negative effects. So that's when something really bad happens. Say your ship got hit and you try to repair it, but for some reason you rolled the red die and it can't be repaired, and you're also leaking fuel or whatever, and you could be stranded in space until those friendly Imperials come along to tow you back home, right? That's what they do. So again, this dice game, the dice mechanic, those are the core rules, core mechanic of the game, and what makes it different from D20 games. I've spent a lot of time going over that. just to emphasize the fact that this game for your GM is actually a lot more work in some ways, because they have to actually interpret the dice rolls versus just comparing a number value. So it's kind of like reading runes in some ways without actually telling your fortune. It's more of a, did you succeed? Yes, no, and then what happened? So again, it's definitely more of a roll, R-O-L-E, versus a roll, R-O-L-L play game. So it's pretty cool. Let's go to another section. I'm skipping over a lot of the other dice pool mechanic stuff because I don't want to spend the entire review going over basically how the dice pools work and stuff like that. I've kind of covered that, but I wanted to jump into some of the more fun, less meaty stuff, like character creation. And a lot of people may be laughing at that because character creation, actually making your character up, can be one of the most time-consuming processes in the game, but it can also be one of the most rewarding, where you can really get in there and make a hero. So there's a ton of different character stuff going on through. I'm going to run through this pretty quickly just because there's a lot of stuff to cover. But you basically want to create your core concept, determine your duty, and that duty is a special thing that has an effect on the game, but also kind of your player motivation as well for other things. You're going to pick your species and your career and specializations and stuff, and then you're going to spend some XP points to kind of round out your character, and then figure out your attributes and stuff like that. Figure out your motivation. Just hit the camera. Choose your gear and appearance, and then acquire rebellion resources. Again, this is the kind of rebel version of the game. Edges of Empire is kind of like smuggler, imperial kind of other side of the same token there. So determine your background. That's pretty straightforward and explanatory. Now, duty is something different. Duty is basically a resource that helps you get stuff from the rebels. So as you acquire more duty points, and it kind of varies depending on how many players you have in the party to start with, that influences, you can spend those to get additional bonuses. So for instance, you can get credits, you can get extra XP. This is all character creation specific stuff. But then it also is your amount of influence with the rebels. Say you need, I don't know, some Bothan spies need to get you some plans or something. You're basically going to have to, are you high enough on the duty chart to actually qualify for that stuff? So, and then this is the specific duty you can roll for that. And then it's different types of stuff, like your guy really wants to do combat victory. Like, you're all about showing the Empire that the rebels can hold their own in combat. That's the first one here. Then you've got opposite of that. You've got recruiting, basically. Like, you know that this is going to be a war of attrition, so you're all about recruiting new people to the rebellion. So stuff like that. Duty and play and how that all works. Again, that kind of changes. Duty's a threshold. All that good stuff. Character species. There's I want to say 8 character species. You got Bothans, Droids, Duros, Grand. So that's what those guys are. If you've ever wondered, that's what a Bothan looked like. Many of them died. And then I can grab the page. Then of course you've got humans. I'm going to butcher this one. Ithorians. Sorry, Mon Calamari, because it's a trap. And then these guys, the Sulisnans. They speak Ethiopian, I believe. So if you role-playing character, you got to speak Ethiopian the whole time, but it's okay because it doesn't actually mean Ethiopian words when you say it. But go check that out if you think I'm lying. Funny Star Trek notes. Anyway, pick your species. You can be a droid. Just a heads up on that. Their stats aren't the best, but they can do a lot of other stuff. They're very useful in non-combat roles. I skipped over the stats completely, so let me go over that real quick. Basically, there are 6 stats. There's brawn, agility, intellect, cunning, willpower, and presence. So brawn is your strength stat, your constitution. It's how tough you are, how strong you are. Agility, obviously, how nimble you are. Intellect, how smart you are. Cunning, a different kind of smarts, maybe like street smarts. Willpower, how mentally tough you are. And then presence, how persuasive you can be. So average stats are 2s. I believe this only goes up to 6. Yeah. So 1 through 6. 1 is your weak in that stat. 6 is your superpower in that stat. Typically 2 is pretty average. You can bump it up to, in character creation to 3 or 4. 5 is the cap at creation, seeing as how 6 is the max you could ever be. So anyway, I'm not gonna go through all those guys. If you're familiar at all with the Star Wars universe, you can check all that stuff out. Probably familiar with that, probably more than I am. But there's that. Choosing a career specialization, these are the classes. So you've got different, basically what's your class. So you've got aces, which they are specialized, you get 4 specializations in different abilities or different career skills. And then you have your different specialization trees. So you want to be the best driver in the galaxy, or pilot. Pilot's different than driver, but the gunners are blowing stuff up with those said guns. Then there's commander, which they're kind of the captain, commodore type guys who give a lot of orders. Very good support class here. So you've got their specialization: commodore, squadron leader, tactician. You've got the diplomat, ambassador, talent tree, quartermaster, and agitator. So different engineers. You've got the mechanic. You've got the saboteur and the scientist. Soldier. You've got commandos. Medic, sharpshooter. You've got the spy, infiltrator, scout, and slicer. That's your hacker. Then you've got the recruit. This is a universal talent tree. It costs more XP to get these, but they're, again, universal talents that you can pick from. And then acquiring talents and all that stuff. And then just more character creation, all that good stuff. The next section I would like to cover, skills. I'm not going to do that because skills are pretty straightforward. Read the skill, get the description, why you'd want to use it. It's, again, very straightforward. Skills give you more dice when you're doing the specific checks, though. So for instance, if you're in a fist fight, you're going to use your brawl skill. It's a combat skill, and then you're going to check out the page here. Let's just go check it out. It's a, let's see, brawl. Where's it at? Oh, these are different skill sets. So anyway, now I want to look it up. Let's see. Luckily, there's a handy page or something. So 130, 131. So it's a combat skill. It's going to affect your dice pool, basically. So combat checks, how that works, if you're trained in it or not, also has an effect on all that good stuff. So, all right. Next up, we have the talent section. I'm not going to read all the talents. These are kind of like skills, but they're designed more for specific situations and kind of like your trick shots and stuff like that. Dodge, dynamic climber, natural charmer, stuff like that. So these are very specific applications that you use, and they again affect your dice pool to kind of succeed in checks. There are active and passive skills, so that's one thing. It's a pretty big section. Goes over all that. Gear and equipment, again, if you're interested at all in the Star Wars universe, just from a kind of lore / background perspective, gear and equipment's always fun to flip through. You get to see the different stuff, just reading about it, just different descriptions and all that fun stuff. A lot of weapons and ordinances and stuff in there. So combat knives, all that fun stuff, armor types, good stuff. The different gear, there's binders, comm jammers, breath mask. So all the fun stuff you might see in the movies, if you ever wonder what those were, probably in this book to go through as well. Flipping through, conflict and combat. Most of the game is going to be taking place in kind of a narrative kind of situation where you don't really keep track of player turns or timing or anything like that. Kind of similar to the way Dark Heresy does it, where you've got the kind of loose narrative gameplay where the GM is describing the situation or the scene, talking about what's going on, and the players are talking about their actions, and that's kind of a freeform thing. Combat, however, takes place in a much more structured environment. You're going to have initiative orders and stuff like that. You're going to go through the steps of combat, which I'll run through real quick. There's a determine initiative, assign initiative slots. Participants take turns, round ends, and then if the bad guys have been defeated or the players have been killed, then you're going to go to the encounter ends. And that's pretty much, you kind of go that. To get your initiative, you roll it on your cool or your vigilance stat, which can be modified. There's also maneuvers, different stuff here. They know a few of them. Different actions that you can have in combat checks. They talk about the different, like for instance, combat checks, you want to apply soak, or you want to do an attack, it's going to be a combat check, whether it's range or melee. There's also, they talk about the different range bands, which is, again, you're using a blaster, so it's, you know, the pulse weapon, or sorry, a plasma weapon, some people laser, whatever you want to call it. Probably don't have a lot of issues with range, so it's kind of more freeform when you're thinking about ranges and stuff like that. Whether you're 1 or 2 range bands out, or your melee range, which is at the engaged range, you're really close. So short range, medium range, long range, extreme range, kind of self-explanatory there. Additional combat modifiers, your difficulty can change as well. If you're engaged and you're trying to shoot somebody, that can also cause some issues for you. Grappling is a thing, so tons of different stuff here, but ground combat's pretty straightforward. If you've played any other RPGs, combat makes sense. Recovery and healing wounds and stuff like that. The soak, your armor has a soak value, stuff like that. You have a toughness value that it kind of works against. This is where Star Wars really stands out as a role-playing game, in my opinion. Having the ability to have ship-to-ship combat, not just dogfights, but also frigates, capital ships, etc. That's an option in this game. I kind of mentioned this in one of the other reviews I've done. If you wanted to play it, you could just, you know, play a game of X-Wing to do your dogfight. You can follow the rules here. Kind of joking around with this with Big Red, but you really could just play X-Wing to do your things. It's a little bit weird because they do have some of the ship stats, but with some work, you could convert it over and give yourself like like speed, obviously handling stuff like that. The X-Wing cards could work. The X-Wing figures would totally work. Would be really cool. So more crossover stuff for you if you have X-Wing, but if you want to try a completely different thing with ship-to-ship combat, big old capital ships blasting each other, that is a thing. So talk about a bunch of different stuff in the space combat. Really ups the ante and makes this game different. The Force, let's skip to that section. Obviously, Star Wars, the Force is kind of a big deal. I don't know if you've heard of it before. You can be Force sensitive in this game. Becoming Force sensitive happens during character creation. Then it gives you access to these different skill trees, which kind of like the universal skill trees, they cost more to upgrade or go through, but they can be quite potent. It also gives you force powers, as you can see here, and there's a couple of different trees for the force powers. There's a really cool picture of Mara Jade. So yeah, force trees. The section's game master stuff, just kind of explain how to interpret the dice a little bit better. If you're an inexperienced game master, reading the section is always super helpful because it kind of helps you go through how to make player characters, or how to make NPCs, how to do the skill checks and stuff like that, how to create a campaign, how to run the game, all that fun stuff. One of the sections I want to skip to real quick is page 343, which again I mentioned earlier, the compatibility with Edges of Empire and how that works. So in the Edges of the Empire book, they talk about obligation. Obligation is a similar stat to duty, or similar mechanic to duty. Again, two sides of the same coin. But you can run the game, you can have characters cross over or whatever. You can run it using obligations only. You can run it using the duty stat, or duty roleplay stuff only. You can do both, or you can do either. You can have characters have both an obligation and a duty, and then have either. But it does have an effect on gameplay, so you may want to, if you are playing in Edges of the Empire campaign and want to use this book as well, you want to flip through the section. The good news is it's totally compatible and ready to rock and roll. So the galaxy, again, for you fluff bunnies out there, if you want to read about the lore, more stuff about the colonies and the inner and outer rim, mid-rim, all that stuff, rebel territory, that's the best section to go through. It talks about different planets, all that fun stuff. The Rebellion, it's going to talk about the history of the Rebellion and all that good stuff. More background information, some about the rebel bases and stuff like that. Actually has a map of one. The Adversaries, this is what I was talking about earlier. If you are in the Rebel Alliance and you have some nemesis, you can actually have an Alliance commander that's your nemesis based on like role-playing reasons. But it goes through all the different kind of factions. There's obviously the Galactic Empire, all those guys that could be fighting with you, the military guys, the bureaucracy, excuse me, Dark Trooper, Stormtrooper, Scout Troopers. Those are the guys you're going to be running into real quick. They're really not that bad a shot. I don't know, the movies give them a bad rap, but they're not terrible. The Galactic Underworld, maybe you're going to have some wheeling dealings with some smugglers that went south, but they've got the Fets in there, so crime lords as well. So fun times. Maybe you ticked off some droids. There's an assassin droid after you. Maybe you got a bounty in your head. I don't know. Core World guys here. Fringe and Galactic Dwellers and stuff like that. And then the one of my favorites, the Jedi and Hiding. Again, this takes place around the time of A New Hope. Most of the Jedis have been killed. Vader has hunted down the last remaining Jedis as well, so they're in hiding. And finally, the last section I'm going to cover. This is the adventure. This is the quick start adventure for the GM. It's 3 episodes to run through, and it's lined out pretty straightforward for you, really easy to do. Nice little pre-adventure. I'm not going to flip through anymore because I don't want to spoil it, but that's pretty much it for the Age of the Rebellion role-playing game. It's a core rulebook from Fantasy Flight Games. It's really well done, definitely worth it. Again, 460 plus pages. You know what I didn't show you guys, and I meant to, was the character sheet. So there's the character sheets real quick. Character name, all the relevant stats. They're really pretty. They really are. So character sheet, and we can call that one done. But you don't need special dice, but they do sell them again. I'll probably be doing a review of these dice later. But that's all you need. Get some friends, play Star Wars, play some role-playing games. Again, R-O-L-E, not R-O-L-L, role-playing. It's fun. I really do think that a good role-playing game, if it's got a good core mechanic, which this game does, then it really just depends on the group. Maybe your group is into the hack and slash, want to blow stuff up. Maybe this isn't the game for them, but if they enjoy role-playing with a different mechanic than D20s, that gives you a little bit more freeform. Your GM is willing to put the work in as well. It's a very rewarding system. It's really cool. I definitely would recommend checking it out. Pick up the book, read through it. It's got a lot of fun stuff. If you're a Star Wars fan, this is definitely going to be a book that you're going to want on your reading list. So that's pretty much it for BoLS. This has been AdamHarry with another BoLS review. Hope you enjoyed it. Thanks for watching. Have a good one.